We live in an era of road rage and cyberbullying, so maybe it shouldn't surprise us that old decorum seems to be lost on the presidential campaign trail, too. But in case you need confirmation that it's gone, well, here it is. Last night in Albuquerque, the lid blew off. Outside a Trump rally, protesters broke through barricades and stormed the arena. They threw bottles and burning T-shirts at the police, who responded with a barrage of pepper spray and smoke grenades. Inside the hall, wasn't much better. Some members of the crowd held up signs and were forcibly removed. Today, Trump took to Twitter saying, quote, "The protesters in New Mexico were a bunch of thugs who were flying the Mexican flag. The rally inside was big and beautiful, but outside, criminals." This chaos was an amplified version of a Trump rally in Chicago a couple of weeks ago when police were brought in to calm testy protesters. It all points to a potentially troubling trend of over-caffeinated rhetoric inciting crowds into bad behavior. And it's not just Trump. Supporters of Democratic candidate Bernie Sanders were criticized when they disrupted a meeting in Nevada, hurling insults at the party chairwoman, even threatening her life. Sanders was taken to task by critics for not condemning those supporters strongly enough and for hinting there could be more trouble at the Democratic National Convention.
Will the convention be messy?
Well, of course it will be. But everything, that's what democracy is about.
By historic standards, we're living in relatively calm times. So why are so many people so mad? Joining me to sort this out are Heather Cox Richardson, a presidential historian from Boston College. Good to see you again, Heather. Charles Derber, also from BC. He recently wrote the book Bully Nation. Charlie, it's good to see you, too. So, Heather, starting with you, politics is always an exercise in conflict, but it's usually words that are the vehicle for expressing the conflict. How do we transition into such anger and violence and threats in this election cycle?
Well, we've been here before, but what's really going on
When were we here before?
in the 1880s and the 1890s.
Okay.
Very similar place and a very similar set of circumstances, because in both eras what you have is people from the outside who are trying to gain power by convincing supporters that the current government is illegitimate. And this on the Republican side has been happening since at least the last decade, but before that as well. Sanders is picking up the same kind of language, but there are a lot of Americans who believe that the government is being controlled by somebody who should not have a say in it, either the very rich or immigrants or African Americans or women, and they want to take that country back.
So you're not surprised, actually?
No, not at all.
Do you buy in this theory?
Well, I think, the system seems broken. I think this anger is coming from people across the board who feel like the 1%, the people who run the country, the establishment of the Republican Democratic Party, are simply not responding to them. They're responding to their own interests. And so I think when you say, Jim, we're in relatively calm times, I think the facade might be there, but underneath, it's not at all calm. Most people are really distressed about their lives and distressed about their
the
possibilities.
occupiers started the 99% of the 1%. You didn't see much violence at those things. So
No.
why not there and why here?
See, I link this more to Trump. Trump's, when I think of Trump, think of the whole image, Jim. If you think of an image of people fighting on the streets around politics, what comes to mind for me is Germany in the 1920s and 1930s. The right-wing people of which, Hitler was just one of many right-wing populist sort of leaders who were inciting violence all the time. I think we're seeing something similar. The Republican Party has been increasingly sort of taking over and being taken over by right-wing populist elements.
1968 was not right-wing violence.
No, so it's not only,
violence.
and the left can definitely go, that's what I'm saying, the system is not working across the board.
The word neither of you used was rigged. Why is there not violence at Elizabeth Warren events? I mean, she's saying this, essentially the message, the common message, even though they have totally different solutions of Sanders and Trump, is the system is rigged. I think she almost trademarked that phrase. Why don't we see people going crazy at Elizabeth Warren events? She gets huge crowds.
Well, she's not inciting people to go crazy, among other things.
Bernie Sanders is inciting people to go crazy?
In both cases, both Sanders and Trump, you have politicians who do not have a majority behind them, and they know they don't have a majority behind them. So how do you get that majority? You convince people that the system is rigged, and you see this language over and over with Trump. Every time he doesn't get what he wants, he doesn't say, oh, gee, I screwed up and didn't manage to figure out how to get my delegates. He says, the system is rigged.
The thing is, the system is rigged in many ways, and I think that's why Sanders is getting a lot of support and Trump is getting a lot of support. But I think the key thing is that I think that most of the Sanders supporters have tended to be peaceful. Their tendency to do these false equivalences. The Trump, what you have is a leader, now a nominee of a major party, Trump, who is basically playing out this script of saying, as you said, Heather, the system is illegitimate. They are betraying. There are people inside the country and outside the country who are betraying the essential character of the country. It's been taken over, starting back to his birther stuff with Obama.
Yeah.
And he's just doing more and more of that. And and this is what I call the betrayal narrative. It comes out of right-wing populism. It says the fundamentals of the country are being betrayed. And people are really ticked off.
Well, you're both the experts, but I have to say, I know you both are focusing on Trump. Let me read you just a couple of texts the chair of the Democratic Party in Nevada got after that convention there. Shame on you. I hope you were taken out on a stretcher when Philly riots. That's one line. Bitch, answer me. How much did the Hillary campaign pay you? And one more. May retribution come fully and harshly upon you. Curse you. I mean, you can say they're outliers. By the way, I could read you 20 more if you had time. So is Sanders egging on his people as much as you think Trump is egging on his people?
Well, there is certainly concern within the Democratic establishment that he is currently the person weakening Clinton because he is, again, delegitimizing her, saying she was never popular. She has been
So is he
bought.
inciting violence by that delegitimization, as you call it?
I think the delegitimization does incite violence. I don't think Bernie Sanders himself is interested in violence. I think Trump is. I think in Trump it's a selling point for his particular demographic. It is not a selling point for Sanders'
It's the core
demographic.
of Trump's appeal.
What's the core?
The core is the anger and the idea that things are so dangerous, the country is being lost, that you need a strong man who's prepared to do whatever it takes to get the system back to real Americans.
Okay, so let's do a little Nostradamus thing. I know you're looking at history and you're looking back a little bit too. Let's go forward. What does this portend for the future? And I mean two futures, the future leading up to November 8th and the future post-November 8th, Heather.
Well, you know my take on this one.
Which
I think
is?
in the short term, we're looking at violence. Regardless of what happens at either convention, people are very unhappy. There's a demographic that really believes that the system has been taken over and they need to take it back. In the short term, I'm really unhappy. In the long term, the times this has happened in America, what has come of it is people recognize they've got to re-legitimize a political system, and they do, and we get a very strong progressive movement that creates, that makes wealth much more evenly distributed.
Let's,
we get a good time.
if we just follow the polls for a second, I'm not saying it will happen, but if the polls are right, so Bernie Sanders people feel they were cheated once Philadelphia's over, and Trump's people feel they were cheated once November 8th's over. What do those two constituencies do?
Well, it looks right now, and everything's changing very rapidly, that Bernie Sanders will try and bring his people into Clinton's fold.
Well, we don't know that.
You
3
don't
days
know
ago,
that,
he
but
was
you
saying
asked
it's
whether
the
that was
lesser
gonna
of
happen.
two evils.
Yeah, but that, it looks to me like, will happen on the Democratic side. Trump is a wild card. And what's going to happen in the next 2 months, I think, is utterly a wild card. I would not take a bet on it.
What do you think happens in the future, Troy?
So if two options. If Trump wins, which is, it's possible.
Yeah.
I think we're in for something we have not seen for a long
Which is
time,
what?
which is a man who's prepared to mobilize supporters in this sort of non-civil, sometimes violent way. And I think it is not. We don't really have a historical parallel quite like this.
We've never seen it before.
And
No,
what
I
happens
don't
if he
think
doesn't
not.
win?
If he doesn't win, it depends on how Hillary tries to integrate. They put 5 Sanders people on the platform committee.
Yeah.
Some of those people are really progressive movement people. I think it's a mischaracterization to say that the Sanders people are fundamentally violent. Left
I didn't say they're
popular.
fundamentally
No,
violent.
but
There's
there's a lot
violence.
of it there. But I think there's a lot of core commitment to nonviolence because what are they against? They're against a violent country. They're against U.S. foreign policy and its violent aspects. They're against economic violence by very wealthy people. So while there is, of course, real violence out there, to say that the Sanders people are violent in the same sense that the Trump supporters and what Trump himself is doing to equate Sanders to Trump, I think it's a fundamental false equivalency.
Got to hold you there. Heather, it's nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks so much, Charlie. Good to see you. Good
Nice to
luck
see
with the
you.
book.
Thank you
Thanks
very
so
much.
much.